welcome back to another video. This one is slightly different than the rest that I've posted because, as you can tell from the title, this is part of a new book club series that I'm starting. So hi, my name's Natalie Campbell-Reid, I'm a screenwriter, and today we're going to be talking about the book Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Oh my gosh, there literally is no other book I could think of starting the series with other than this one, because Elizabeth Gilbert is like my creative fairy genie guru person. And so much of how I think about creativity in my creative life and how I approach it is because of the things that she talks about in this book and the things that she's talked about in her TED Talk, in interviews. And so this felt like the most natural place to start. It's called Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear. That feels very poignant because I realized for me, moving from working exclusively in the corporate world into finally deciding I will move into writing, what I realized is that it kicked up a lot of fear. There was a lot of excuses, there were a lot of reasons not to, and in this book Elizabeth Gilbert kind of goes through them one by one and picks them apart and tells you why they're not true. Those fears are not true. And one of my favourite ways I heard her talk about fear, I think it was in an interview with Marie Forleo. She talked about fear being a necessary companion.
Interested in conquering it. Actually, what my relationship with fear begins with is a tremendous amount of respect and appreciation, because fear is the reason I'm still alive today. It's the reason you're still alive today. Every single one of us can point to a moment in our lives that we survived because we were afraid. All of us are here because our fear is constantly protecting us. That's its job, and it does its job beautifully. It's just that it's all jacked up on Red Bull, and it's really trigger happy, and it doesn't know the difference between a genuinely dangerous situation and just a little bit of a nervy situation, you know? So whenever I feel fear arise, which is constantly because I'm always trying to do creative things, and creativity will always provoke your fear because it asks you to enter into a realm with an uncertain outcome, and fear hates that, thinks you're going to die. So anytime I start a new creative project, the fear rises, and the first thing I do is say to it, thank you so much for how much you care about me and how much you don't want anything bad to happen to me, and I really appreciate that. Your services are probably not needed here because I'm just writing a poem. Like, no one's gonna die. No one's gonna die. It's okay. You know, and I just talk to it, but in this really friendly way. And I don't go to war against it. I acknowledge its importance. And then I invite it along. I'm like, you can come with me, but I'm doing this thing.
Yeah,
you know?
I loved the metaphor that you shared. It's like, fear's gonna be in the car, but it's gonna be in the back seat. And it's not gonna drive.
Or choose the snacks, or hold the map, or touch the radio. Like, fear doesn't get to make any decisions in creative ventures because, frankly, with all due respect to grandfather fear, it simply doesn't understand what creativity even is.
And for me, that was the first time I'd ever heard someone talk about fear in that way. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down my key takeaways from Big Magic. Number one, fear says, I'm not allowed or I can't. Liz says, you don't need anyone's permission to live a creative life. What this made me think about was just, at the time, I was sort of wrestling between whether or not I stayed in this career that I had invested 10 years of my life in, but I knew wasn't serving me anymore. And I didn't really know how to pursue a creative life or what that looked like. What was most important to me was really to start writing and to honor the relationship with my creativity. So this idea that you need permission, and it may be permission from family, it may be permission from friends, it may be permission from a spouse, it may be, and mostly is just permission from yourself to allow yourself to do this thing. And at the end of that chapter, actually, Liz writes you a permission slip. It's like, here you go, you can do it, go and do it. Because you don't need anyone's permission to live a creative life. And you can end up putting all these excuses in the way. And what I really loved that Liz talked about in the book is her parents who were farmers, and they had they had dreams of things they wanted to do. Like her dad wanted to plant Christmas trees and he just went and planted them, or he wanted to raise sheep and he decided to get the sheep and start raising them. And just that attitude of like, if you want to do something, do it, and you don't have to burn your boats, you don't have to burn the bridges. I remember seeing in a screenwriters forum someone was asking about whether or not they should quit their job just so they can go all in on screenwriting, and I just like recoiled. I was like, oh my god, please don't do that. But that's me, right? That's my risk tolerance. I think give yourself permission to create around your job. if you can, right? I understand like there's so many, everyone lives such like wildly different lives, and you just have to sort of figure out what works for you. And maybe it is more of a case of like you can take 3 months off work and just really go in on this thing and then go back to work, and maybe you just do it like that. Maybe it is something you can just find scraps of time in the morning, on your lunch break, after work, or on the weekends. But yeah, like however you can do it, give yourself permission to do it. One of the things she says in the book about entitlement is that you must possess a fierce sense of personal entitlement. I'm just going to read like a direct quote from this because I do love this and I think it's amazing. I recognise that the word entitlement has dreadfully negative connotations, but I'd like to appropriate it here and put it to good use, because you'll never be able to create anything interesting out of your life if you don't believe that you're entitled to at least try. Creative entitlement doesn't mean behaving like a princess or acting as though the world owes you anything whatsoever. No, creative entitlement simply means believing that you are allowed to be here, and that merely by being here, you are allowed to have a voice and a vision of your own. I don't think there's anything else to say around that. You can do it. You totally have the permission to do it. You can do it, and you should do it. And there's actually, if you want to make this even more tangible, there's a practice from a social researcher storyteller called Brene Brown, and she, I can't remember which of her books she talked about this in, but effectively you can actually write yourself a permission slip, and if it helps to like write that out, draft it out on Word, print it off, sign it, and put it on your desk or hang it up on a wall, fold it up and put it in your pocket so you can always have it with you. Whatever the case is, if it helps to have that tangible thing that reminds you, yes, I have the permission to do this thing, then do it. So, second fear, what if no one likes my work? Or worst of all, what if they don't care? Do you care? Does it matter to you? It's just really important when you write something that you care about. She said, you are entitled to the labour, but you are not entitled to the fruit. And it's a quote that she got from a spiritual text. So much about this is like tangled in with the idea of really leaning into and enjoying the process and understanding that the process is the part. So if you watch the video that I posted about creative lessons, one of the teachers from the masterclass was Ava DuVernay, and she talked about this whole thing about the process is it, like that this is what it is. And so ultimately what needs to happen, if one of the fears that you feel really strongly is what if no one likes your work or what if no one cares, is about redefining what success looks like. And again, I have another video on that somewhere around this region. This is something I came into the year really strongly with, redefining what success meant to me within my creative life. And it's really hard. Like it's not a simple question, because yeah, like you want to win the competition, or you want to have your script purchased or optioned, have it greenlit, have it go into production, have it released. Like those are all amazing things, because until those sort of accolades come along, there's nothing sort of outward to demonstrate to people. And I think that's where the difficulty can come in terms of redefining your success. If I get to the age of 60 and I have been doing this thing for 30 years and all I have are piles of rejections to show for it, will it still have been worth it? So instead of placing the value on the outcome, what happens if I place the value on the input, on my efforts, on the striving, on the trying? Like what if I place the value there and the outcomes are just, they're just that, like they may happen, they may not, but they're nothing to do with me. And so this, I don't know, like creativity then for me just becomes like just so much more beautiful. Beautiful feels like such a lame word. It doesn't feel good enough. But it's the only way I can really describe like how it feels for me currently, when I'm like, okay, let me celebrate my efforts over getting into a competition and over winning an award and getting an agent or getting a green light, all those things. They would be nice, but the relationship that is my duty right now to cultivate is the relationship I have with my creativity. And it feels sacred. I think that's the best word to use rather than beautiful. It feels sacred, and not Beyonce sacred, because then it's less about, what other people want or what other people care about. Sorry, I feel like I went really like spiritual guru, woohoo, Woo! Anyway, third fear. You fear that you'll be rejected or you won't be successful. And Liz said something so powerful in relation to this. She said, learning how to deal with frustration and disappointment is part of the job of being a creative person. And the reason this landed with me is because recently I was listening to something else. I was listening to something that was talking about what emotion exists in the space between not knowing something and knowing something. So in that learning gap what is the emotion that exists? And the emotion was frustration, which I found really interesting because, I mean, I don't know if I'm just slow, but I was like, when she asked the question, I didn't know what the answer was. I was just like staring blankly, waiting. And when I read this, when I was rereading this book, and Liz said that about it's your job as a creative person to learn how to deal with disappointment and frustration. And just that new bit of knowledge that frustration is that feeling when you're in the gap between not knowing and knowing. It just made so much more sense to me that it was like frustration is just, it's meant to exist here. Disappointment is meant to exist here. But also joy is also meant to exist here, right? So if you're not attaching yourself too strongly to the outcomes of like, be shortlisted for this competition, or I want to win this competition, or I want my script to be purchased by so-and-so and this production company and put on this platform and whatever, all those things, right? If you detach from those, you can still want those things, but detach from them, then in that in-between space of uncertainty and of not knowing, you can have joy, you can have fun, you can have creativity, but there will also be frustration, there will also be disappointment. They live in that bubble of uncertainty and that space of not knowing and that space of learning and growing and trying things and failing here and failing there, and trying to piecemeal together your own path through whatever that looks like. And one big takeaway that has been sort of the foundation of my creative mindset is when Liz Gilbert talks about, and if you have small kids in the room, you can mute here. She talks about this concept of shit sandwiches. Anything you want to do in life comes with its own flavour of shit sandwich. And what our job is to understand what things we are willing to welcome into our lives along with their shit sandwich. And in the book, she talks about having this friend who was a brilliant writer and who she thought was an even better writer than she was. And they were just getting just as much rejections as she was getting at the time. But they were so much more weighed down by them and just not feeling good about it. And ultimately, I think, decided to quit writing and do something else. And she said she was sitting there staring at his half-eaten shit sandwich. And the only thing she could think in that moment was, are you going to finish that? Because I'll have it if you won't have it. I'll take it. And so where this came up for me was, God, I don't even know if I should admit how grossly naive I was. But anyway, we'll go there. Why not? I think it was like my first year into screenwriting. I went to this one-day introductory course and it was led by Philip Shelley, who heads up the Channel 4 screenwriting program. Fabulous. Really excited. I was looking forward to it. He did a whole sort of like workshop through the day, and then he had a head of a production company come in and talk to us, as well as a working screenwriter. The lasting memory for me was the working screenwriter who came in and had a chat with us. I remember when I walked into that workshop, I had in my mind that like it would just be as simple as writing the script and selling it. I had no concept of how long this would take. Like that just didn't even feature into my mind as a problem. And so when she sat there and told us that it had taken 8 years, I was presented with my shit sandwich. And that's always what I credit that course for the most. I credit it for gifting me. I left there with my shit sandwich and it was like, hey, look, this is what it's going to take. You're going to try at this thing. You're going to submit for competitions. You're going to get rejected quite like all the time. And then as you get deeper on, you might start to see some, changes. You might start to get longlisted for stuff. Then you might start getting shortlisted for stuff. Then you might even get picked for stuff. Then you might get an agent. Then you might get this. And it's like, this could very well be a 10-year game before you see anything. So anyway, that was when I was presented with my shit sandwich. And and it was like a little invitation. I was like, so do you still want this? And I'm like, yeah, I think I do. I really do. 10 years, all right, let's strap in. It's having that understanding that this would take possibly a decade, possibly longer, possibly never happen. just allowed me to think forward and think, okay, well, what do I want my life to look like over the next 10 years? Do I want it to be that I am struggling to pay my bills and I haven't been able to move forward and make any personal achievements in my life because I dedicated myself wholly to this thing? That didn't feel like a fair trade. And I've also in the book, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, and we'll talk about this actually, so I probably won't skip to this yet. We'll talk about this. Fear number 4. I'm not legitimate unless my creativity pays me. Liz says, don't burden your creativity with the responsibility of paying for your life. And she shares in the book that she didn't quit her job until she had written her 4th book. And her 4th book was the global smash hit super success that was Eat, Pray, Love. And it wasn't until that point that she felt confident enough and comfortable enough to leave her job and become a full-time writer. And obviously she sort of also talks about, just what a privilege that is and how unique of a situation that is and all those things. But that was one of the early sort of lessons I took from her, was about not burdening my creativity with the responsibility of paying for me. And so when I was thinking about, okay, well, here's my shit sandwich. My shit sandwich is this could take 10 years and I might not see anything from it until that point. Okay, so I'm going to be in my 40s. What are all the things that I want to do before then? I need a job to be able to afford to do those things. So I don't want to burn my boats and knock down the bridges in my life so that I can do this screenwriting thing and then find myself years later just burnt out and resentful and mad at my creativity because I'm like, look, I've dedicated all this time to you and what do I have to show for it? Because it's not creativity's job. It's not. And I just thought, okay, if I stop looking at this as a thing that is meant to sort of financially provide for me and create this amazing magical life for me. So if I can look at it as an opportunity to dance, being able to create, being able to write stories, being able to collaborate with other people. At the moment, I'm working on a short film. Being able to do that is me dancing with creativity, which is a beautiful thing. And I love doing it. But also it reminded me of someone who was talking about flowers, and he was asking a florist, how do I make my flowers last longer? And the florist turned to him and said, I'm going to hold your hands while I say this. The flower's not meant to last. They're meant to be here for a while, look pretty, bring joy, and die. That is their job. Okay, that is it. You're not doing anything wrong. Just enjoy them while they're alive and thriving. And when they're dead, you throw them out. That's it. I was but yeah, it made me think about the same thing with creativity. You are entitled to the labor, but you are not entitled to the fruit. And so if I want to have a relationship with my creativity that isn't contingent on monetization, that isn't contingent on creativity providing for me, that isn't contingent on creativity creating the life that I want, in terms of materially in the world. If that is not creativity's job, that's my job. Then creativity's job is just to be this sort of magical, sacred relationship and interaction that I get to have in my life. And I don't know, there's just something that's just so much more, just that deep sigh relief when I just sort of accepted that, because it didn't need to be that. 1 second, let me charge my phone. I did this earlier where I was on a call with the director who I'm working on the short film with today, and oh, flip's sake, that just came out, didn't it? Anyway, the phone just shut off. The phone just completely shut off during our call. Look, I was on 6%, so who knows how far that would have taken me. Where are we? Yes, I'm not legitimate unless my creativity pays me. And another thing, so did I finish that thought? For me, anyway, it was just super helpful when I took all of the burden of sort of monetary provision and success off my creativity, because it doesn't promise you that. It actually doesn't. And I just felt realizing that was so helpful for me, because creativity is hey, let's have a good time. I have this idea. I think you'd be great to bring this into the world. All the experience you've had, your kind of voice, I think you'd make a real stamp on this. Let's do this together. And one of the ways I also experienced that feeling of oh my God, how do you say that? Illegitimateness. Game of Thrones. One of the ways that I experienced that feeling of illegitimateness was in introducing myself as a screenwriter. And I know a lot of people who are new, or a lot of people who I wouldn't say even new, just like if you haven't had anything made, there is this feeling, right? Like when someone asks, oh, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a screenwriter. Really? Where's your stuff? And you're like, in my drawer on my computer. I don't know what to tell you. I'm an undiscovered star. Wow! I just remember going to a networking event and someone had asked me the question, what do I do? And I'd gone on this whole thing about my job working in film distribution and how I'd been a marketer for 10 years before. And now I was doing screenwriting. And bless her, she'd gone with me on the whole journey, then like my whole spiel. And then at the end, she was like, oh, why don't you just say you're a screenwriter? I was like, because I just can't say that. Again, the sort of symptoms of feeling like you're not a legitimate creative unless you're being paid by your creativity is that you feel like you can't even say you are that thing, like you can't even claim that identity. And one of the things I learned really early on from taking Shonda Rhimes masterclass is that the moment you write, you are a writer. You can claim that title. The moment you have a script that you've written, you are a screenwriter. And yeah, it's a difficult pill to swallow because it feels a bit impostery. It feels a bit like you're not really there, are you? What gives it legitimacy is not that you've been paid for it, it's that you have done it. You can't even arrive at being paid for it until you've done it. So the fact that you've done it is what makes you legitimate. And a question I had to ask myself was, what if my productivity, hold on a second. Okay, I've got 15 minutes until I start work, so I really need to wrap this video up. But yeah, I thought to myself, like if it never pays me, that means that I really have to enjoy the process. As this is the last fear that we're talking about, I will leave you with another quote from Elizabeth Gilbert. She said that we often think of ourselves as creating the projects, we are making the projects, but actually your project also has the job of making you. And what you'll notice is that you'll leave each project different. It has changed you in some way, it has molded you in some way and shaped you in some way, that you have created something new, but it has also created something new in you. So that is this video. I recommend massively picking up a copy of Big Magic. I also just recommend going on a Liz Gilbert interview spiral because she shares so much. I mean, honestly, I feel like I have been mentored by her through the screen. She has no idea who I am or the impact of the words that she said, but they have completely transformed, laid the foundation for how I approach creativity in my own life and building a sustainable relationship with creativity, nurturing, I should say, a sustainable relationship with creativity. And a lot of what comes up in the creative living is fear. A lot of the things that will hold you back, they won't necessarily look like fear on the surface. So things like feeling illegitimate, feeling like you're not allowed to, or that you can't, or feeling like you're not educated enough, feeling like you need permission. All these things are just fear in its many different forms, trying to prevent you from doing the creative thing, trying to prevent you from what it sees as doing something that is scary and that is going to threaten your survival. But it won't. And so when you're going on the road trip with your creativity in shotgun, I just want to encourage you to put fear in the back seat, talk to it with a loving voice, and let fear know that you are thankful for it, that it's earned its place in the car, it's very valuable to you and your survival. But in this realm, in your creative work, it's not needed, and fear gets to be along for this ride and keep its eyes peeled for any real dangers that are coming along the way. But yes, I'm really, oh God, I'm so happy. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know, because I love reading non-fiction books, particularly non-fiction books about creativity, because why not? So I will do more of these to share some more of my favourites with you. Thank you for sharing this video. I'm going to go grab my lunch quickly and then log on for an afternoon of work. Thanks.